For those of us on planet Earth, it would seem fair to say that in the past week or so, we've enjoyed a degree of trouble in River City. For non-Americans, that means a little bit of chaos. And I'm supposed to do some reflections, I think. So this morning, the first one would be on how do we live through it? And tomorrow, for those of you who are back again, and for anybody else who drops by, where do we go from here? All under my standard caveat, which is that, as you well know, I am a storyteller. Which means that whatever I say, you need to take with perhaps a whole bag full of salt. But if it just happens that in spite of my best efforts, the truth pops out, use it. And if you can make it better, do it. So there's the caveat. And now the trouble in River City. The only thing I think we're missing is a big war. We tried for that, but didn't make it. And in the 84 years that I've been on this planet, I can't ever remember a time when so much was happening all at the same time. Part of that is just that we're all electronically connected, and we just hear about things faster and sooner. And it may also be true that it really is a strange and interesting time. I mean, it's almost as if the planet itself is going through the same emotional hassle that all of us are going through. Fires in New Zealand, volcanoes in the Philippines, fires in California. Well, I mean, you can pick your common thing, and we all have, when things happen like that all at once, and things get a little rocky. Obama put it rather well. He almost got kicked out just for saying this, but I think he's right. What happens typically is that people reach for their guns and their Bibles. They reach for the defense, and they reach for what they think is a solid rock. I think it's fair to say that those solid rocks don't exist as we used to think they did. And under those circumstances, we're in for some very interesting times. It almost seems strange to be talking about peace in such a moment. But my understanding, very honestly, is this is part of peace. That peace, as some of us may have imagined it, is not so much lying on a hammock with a gentle breeze. It's the dynamic flow of forces coming together, and sometimes in harmony and sometimes not. It's the process of life moving on. It can be done well or poorly, but if it ever stops, like we actually had the peace that some people think they want to, we wouldn't be. Life stopped is life no more. So all those things that we imagine, sometimes quite correctly, as being the antithesis of peace, I found to be really quite essential. There are a lot of things, but three major ones are chaos, confusion, and conflict. Now, presumably, if you have a lot of chaos, confusion, and conflict, you're going to have not peace. Curtis is back. But it turns out that chaos ends up being the way the forms of life are broken so that something new can appear. If chaos were not happening constantly, life would not be. That may not be what we all like to hear, but I think it's true. Any neurophysiologist or biologist or whatever will tell you just that. And confusion is, for me, just the intellectual equivalent of chaos. It messes up made-up minds so new ideas can appear. You really have to be confused before something new can appear. And then conflict, it always bothers people, but the truth of the matter is, I think that's the way we sharpen our ideas. Or if we were doing evolution, it's the way species become better species. So anyhow, chaos, confusion, and conflict are all there. And just to tell you what you already know, each one of them creates collateral damage. In a word, they're a big pain. I could put it more graphically, but you get the point, I think. And the biggest pain for me has always been ending. When chaos, confusion, and conflict strike with a vengeance, as they seem to be at the moment. There's a whole mess of ending going on. Things that we thought were going to be forever aren't. Things that we were sure were going to happen won't. That life plan, that certainty for our system and our world, not written that way. When ending happens, there are a lot of softer ways to talk about it, but my experience of ending is it's dying. It's the end. It might be a way of life. I can remember back in the Civil Rights Day, I was in the South and my Southern friends said, well, you're killing our way of life. White civil friends. And I said, yes. But I think you're doing it to yourself too. But it's still an ending. Endings are something that we humans don't like. But there is a saving grace. And I suspect that it's genetically engineered into each and every one of us. Excuse me, Curtis. It was originally identified by a marvelous lady, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and it's called the grief work process. Up to the time of her writing and thinking, everybody knew about grief. It was a serious big pain. But nobody could really imagine that it did any good. And I think what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross showed us was that within broad limits, it's predictable, it happens in stages, and it's there for a reason. It helps, but you got to follow the process. I don't know why I started thinking about this, but it occurred to me that large systems, that would be organizations and corporations and countries, go through exactly the same process. I just happened to have been called into a variety of companies that were either bankrupted or bought out by corporate raiders or whatever. And sometimes that can be fairly dramatic. One of my clients woke up one morning and discovered that it used to be a $4 billion a year corporation, and within about 6 weeks had become a $2.5 billion corporation. Now, that's just money, but all that money stood for people. And all those people had jobs which weren't anymore. And grief work started. So whether we're talking about each one of us as an individual or all of us as a collective, when it happens, now it can be almost anything. It's funny, it can be very trivial, as some people would see it. I remember losing a chapter on a book back in the days before there was autosave on a computer. And I happened to have been writing about grief work. And as I got that wonderful blue screen, I could just see the process working in front of my eyes. And how does the process go? Well, I suspect that each one of us have experienced it. And the point of sort of highlighting it, and please understand, it never quite works the way I'm going to say, but it's broadly there. Remember, I'm a storyteller. That process gets you from where you is to where you need to be. And it goes like this. It happens. It could be losing a chapter in a book. It could be losing your job. It could be losing your life partner. It could be losing your country. It could be fill in the blank. And the first thing that we experience, it's just absolutely automatic. That's why I say I think it's actually genetically engineered. Shock, anger. And in every language I am familiar with, and that's not all of them, obviously, it's expressed in some version of, oh shit. Now, oh damn doesn't do it. Oh darn won't make it. But it's, oh shit. Usually repeated loudly and often. And for onlookers, there's a natural question, you know, terrible things have happened, but why are you sitting in there in the corner saying, oh shit? Doesn't seem very useful. Well, if you look at what's actually happening, you see it's not only explainable, it's useful. And this is what I'm saying. What happens when we as individuals or as a whole organization or country or whatever experience massive trauma? We go into shock. And typically in shock, the physicians amongst you will tell you, or you don't need any, first thing that happens is the shoulders go forward and breathing stops. Just hold your breath. Now, if you do that long enough, you're going to die for sure. But if you say, oh shit, you can't help but breathe. I mean, just seriously, try saying it. Just, oh, right, you have to breathe in, shit, you breathe out. And if you say it often and repeated, good things happen, like you're breathing again. And then almost inevitably, and I've done this with groups of people in past situations, almost inevitably you start doing what I see some of you doing right now. Smile and then start to laugh. It's funny. And I don't mean it was funny, but I mean sitting there saying, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, is funny. And if you look physiologically at laughter, it does exactly the same thing as saying, oh shit does. You can't laugh if you don't breathe. So the first stage is shock and anger. And it basically does what's needed. It gets us breathing again. Well, that's fine. Now where? The next phase that I've noticed is what has become very popular in a way, denial. And it combined with the if-onlys. Denial in the sense that this really didn't happen. I mean, in companies, for example, I've watched them after they've, it's over. I mean, it's over. And people are sitting around talking about it as if they were going to work tomorrow. That's denial. I've seen the same thing with individuals at a point of death. They're going to see, okay, but they aren't. So denial sounds a little bit like, again, what's the use of it? But it too has a function. The truth of the matter is ending is so painful that taking a break from the pain is essential. I mean, even if it's an hallucinatory break, you just got to have a break from the pain, and denial will do that, if only for a little bit. Now, you got to move on. And we all know people who live their lives in denial. They just won't let go of it. And what happens, of course, is they just give up, effectively, because it's changed and they haven't. So what they were seeking to do, they've not only failed, they've gone in the other direction. So denial is the needed anesthesia. But denial can be a stopping point of life. And sooner or later, for most of us, it goes on. The process moves us. And I call this part memories. That's, you can see it in manufacturing plants or plants that were closed, or people would be sitting around and saying, remember the days we went out and sold this and did this and that and the other thing? Or you lost a life partner and you're saying to a friend, you remember when we used to go to? And it sounds kind of like just living in the past, and it almost sounds like denial. I mean, it sounds like it, but I think it's different. What is different is there is a fundamental recognition at that point that it's over. And we're remembering. Now, the positive thing about memories for me, it's kind of like taking stock of what was to prepare us to figure out what it is we want to take with us, wherever it is we're going. What did we learn? How have we grown? those memories are powerful. But once again, extended too long and they become self-defeating. We also know people who live their lives in memories. And they just never see now. They never see this present moment. They never really see each other, other people. What they see is a memory of what was. And that in itself is ending. And those memories eventually will peter out. And as far as I'm concerned, what happens next is perhaps the holiest moment, and I use that word with whatever content you want to put on it, of human experience. My word for it, as I was thinking about it, was open space. That was my understanding of open space way before we ever had a meeting. It's that period in the process of grieving where absolutely everything is gone. The good news, it's all over, which means that everything is possible. That's the good news. For the first time in your life, there wasn't that busy schedule that prevented you from doing all the things you really wanted to do. Now, it was scary because that schedule probably was one way of talking about who I am. It was your identity, or that relationship, or that country, or that whatever. But it's gone. And what you're left is the incredible silence of open space, which is thunderous silence because it's rich silence. It's the sound of all the things that might be and haven't happened yet. Now, there are some people who, when they get to that point, just say, you know, I've had it. And that's where they stay, and I don't know what happens to them. I guess I'll find out soon enough. But for other people, there's a change. And it usually happens when somebody or something causes us to ask, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Which in the first instance reminds us that there's going to be a rest of your life, which seemed doubtful at the moment. But what are you going to do for the rest of your life? Not an answer, not here's 65 things to help you through it, but a question. A deep question asked by the rising of the sun, the passage of a small child, the words from a good friend, something the tree said. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? You can tell when the change is actually affected. You're going to hear it in 3 magic words, and you're going to say it. I wonder if. I wonder if I could meet somebody else. I wonder if we could have a planet that didn't automatically kill everybody and all things. I wonder if. Now, this may just be word shopping, but it's always struck me as true. When you take wonder and imagination and put them together, what you've got is vision. When you take wonder and imagination and put them together, what you've got is vision. Now, truthfully, the first vision is often a false one, or it's too diaphanous, you can't really get a hold of it, or it's too scary, or it's too whatever. So there's no reason you have to stick with that. You can go on. That's the nice thing. You're still just coming out of open space. There are all sorts of possible visions. What do you think? I wonder if, well, there's one way to try. Try it. See if it works. And the funny thing about a vision, when it begins to work, not only does it enliven you, we talk about vision-driven people. Well, that's true, but it's true for all of us. We had a vision before we ever had anything. And if without a vision, you go nowhere. But another thing is true about vision. It's attractive. There's nothing more fun than being around somebody who's just on fire. They may be on fire about the wrong thing. That's, subject of discussion. But they're on fire. And at that point, sort of like moths to flames. But when those kinds of fires are kindled, what started out as ending is now a new beginning. It's not going to turn out just the way everybody thought it might. Thank God for that. It would be boring. But what was ended is over. What is coming is creating. And here's Mr. Curtis again. Come on, Curtis. There you go. He's older than I am. Ouch. No. Okay. He also bites, which is an ending too. I put him right off my lap and I'll have to go upstairs and get a little iodine. But I leave it at that. And I leave it with this. Each ending, if we'll allow it, is a beginning. The very interesting thing is life is a series of endings and new ones. We seem to think that this is a strange thing, but if I make a decision this morning to go to Chicago, I'm dead to New York or Philadelphia or Montana or whatever. The simple things are endings. Everything is ending and beginning. This is not new territory. Can be scary. Good luck, and I'll see you tomorrow. And some thoughts about, okay, if that might help, and see if it does, in navigating the present moment. Where are we going? And if you think I'm going to have the plan, you can forget about it. I don't. But I do have to go take care of my wounds, Curtis. There are endings to certain things. I'm going to leave you now. I'm sorry to race off, but the blood's a little thick. Bye.
Bye.
And it isn't something you train for, I don't think. It's probably something you remember. Because it turns out, at least in my own experience, that when you're surrounded by peace, you will perform magnificently. And things will happen, and you will do things, and others will do things that really beat the competition. So anyhow, just sort of put that somewhere, think about it. I'm not saying it's right, but it's worked for me. And to the extent that any of you care to go deeper, I want to talk about a lot of things, but in a strange sort of way, but just so you don't think I'm trying to get off the hook. We just happen to have a couple of books on the subject. One is called The Practice of Peace. It is no longer in print, but it is on my website on a PDF, therefore free. And the other is called Wave Rider. And I think you'll get the subtitle, Leadership for High Performance in a Self-Organizing World. That one is still very much in print, Barrett Kohler. One click from Amazon will do it. And I'm not trying to sell books, but if you're interested, it's all there. All right. This may be the strangest, whatever talk, reflection I've ever done. I know where I need to start, and I know where I'd like to get to. And truthfully, I'm not at all sure how we're going to do that. So in a sense, it's a build your own reflection. Trust me a little bit, but not too much. Remember, I'm a storyteller. I think we know pretty well where we are. Not that we like it all that much, but you know, pick up any newspaper, listen to any radio station, talk to your neighbor, and interesting. And of course, we all have our favorite force or entity which is causing whatever it is to happen. And that varies depending on what political party you're in and what part of the geography you occupy, sort of how you feel on a given day. And actually, I was amused. One of the Democratic candidates, as part of their spiel, said, "We're going to get back to normal." I said, "I'm sorry, I wouldn't even know how to define that." Actually, I rather think that whatever's going on is not the fault of anybody. I mean, there's certain people who are obviously making it more uncomfortable, but it's not the fault of anybody. It's all of our faults, or we're all involved. It's what happens, and it's just, I think, this is, makes it sound simple, but I think it's true. It's a matter of living. Every part of life has a beginning, middle, and end. And after a while, the structures and the way we do things and so forth on just run out of steam. We've had 100 pretty good years. I'm not saying there haven't been problems, for sure. But generally speaking, for a lot of people, certain obvious people excluded, things went along in a pretty reasonable way. And more to the point, if it didn't work quite the way we wanted it to, we all knew how to fix it. We just did more of this or less of that. Well, I'm reminded about a year or so ago, a little more maybe, I was having lunch with a friend of mine who happened to be a quite senior person in the State Department. And he said, you know, he says, it's really weird. We're involved in asymmetric diplomacy. I said, oh, excuse me, but what's that? He said, well, they aren't playing by the rules. We all used to know what a state was. We all used to know where boundaries were. But that's not true anymore. And just happenstantially, 2 days later, I was having lunch with another friend who happened to be a four-star general. Not, I mean, he wasn't serving at the time, but, and he said, unprompted, you know, we're in this strange situation where we're all involved in asymmetric warfare.
Hmm.
And I looked at him, he says, yeah, he says, they aren't playing by the rules. Well, it's not so much that they aren't playing by the rules, but I think it's much deeper than that. The rules that we've all had, and we knew perfectly well what they were, we've outgrown. Not unlike crabs and lobsters. You can have a shell that sort of keeps you and protects you, and it's great. But the only problem is you outgrow it. And there comes a point when the only thing you can do is shed it, which is always scary. I suspect painful, although I don't know, I never had one. But I think we're right in the middle of shedding. And there are lots of people who are going to rush in and say, okay, I got the plan. Now, there's absolutely only one thing only that I really feel certain about. Anybody who says they have the plan is nuts. And the reason is very simple. What we're faced with is so complex, so fast moving, so interconnected, so profound, so deep, so broad, we haven't even got an idea of what the issues are. And to have the plan is just, well, I don't know whether this fits or not, but it's surely whistling like passing the cemetery. So I really think, put it in your head and whirl it about for a bit. It's not this person or that bad person or this bad thing or that bad thing. It's all of the above and more. And it's the more that we need to be concerned about. And the good news is that there may in fact be a new shell in our future, if I can continue the image. And the bad news is it may take a serious slog to get there. And when in fact we begin to find that way, that place, that new shell, I think we'll rediscover what peace is. And I think we'll know to the tips of our soul what high performance is. Now, how on earth do we get there? Well, I'm pretty well convinced that we have the means. The question is, do we have the will? And that's not one you are going to answer, I'm going to answer. It's going to be something we're going to experience as we go along for however long that is. Over the last 30 odd years, we've been running this experiment. It's called open space technology. There are a lot of people out there who think it's a meeting methodology, but it's not. It's a natural experiment. And by natural experiment, I mean, nobody intended to do it. It just sort of happened. And then all of a sudden, we looked at it and he said, you know, what's happening just shouldn't. More than that, it couldn't. I mean, in point of fact, it violates every single practice and principle that we've all been taught. So if it is working, we got to get rid of it. There are actually people who have watched them try and do this. Amazing. One of the first open spaces I ever did for a group of folks, not like you guys. this was, and I don't even remember how I got into this, and just parenthetically, I never prepared for an open space. I never tried to get one. They just sort of happened. And very often I had about 10 minutes to sort of prepare myself and prepare for the gathering, just so you know. And it always works. But in this particular case, I don't know who the person was who called me or how they got my name. But it seemed that there was going to be a gathering in Denver of some 250 people. A third were Native Americans, a third were federal bureaucrats, and a third were state and local bureaucrats. Now, if you know anything about the history of Native American people, you know that all three are natural enemies and have been practicing their enemyhood for years. And then just to make this whole thing interesting, this gathering was called to work out the procedure for spending $1.5 billion of highway trust funds, which had been allocated for roads on tribal lands. Now, it's not that the Native Americans are opposed to roads, it's just they don't want them on the holy grounds. And from an engineering point of view, you got a road, you go from point A to point B. Well, you can see what could happen. And in point of fact, this conversation had been going on for 2 years and had gotten precisely nowhere. And when they called me in, they were 2 months from termination. Termination was that point at which the money returned to the treasury. So here are the 250 folks sitting in a circle creating a bulletin board, opening a marketplace, and they went to work. And I did no more than you've been doing. I probably did less. Didn't even have flowers in the middle of the room. And the interesting thing that happened was, I will tell you, the discussions were multitudinous and intense. It would not be unfair to say that the fur was flying. But one thing was very curious throughout it all. No blood was shed. Now, that may seem like an easy and obvious thing, but it wasn't. We were right on the edge the whole way. And that's how hot those issues were. Anyhow, we got to the end of it in 2 days. And in the morning of the third day, when people sort of wrapped it up, oh, and by the way, they did it. In 2 days, they managed to do what they couldn't do in 2 years. That's called high performance. They had written in draft form, needed to be put in legalese, the regulations to deal with $1.5 billion. I thought that was impressive, but most impressive were the words from a Navajo chief in the closing circle. I did what I always do in things like that. I use a talking stick. Navajo chief understood this totally. And for those of you who don't know about it, it's very simple. You just have a stick and I pass it to the right, could go to the left. And the instructions are, if you have the stick, you can speak. And if you don't, you're listening. And in either case, you do it with respect. And I pass the stick. Well, the Navajo chief was last person next to me, going around the other way. And he got the stick and he held it for a minute. First thing he said, I thought I'd die. He says, "White man, where'd you steal that?" And then the next thing he said, I remembered ever since. He said, "I've known most of you for 2 years. I didn't like you very much. But the amazing thing that happened today and yesterday is that we treated each other with respect. We listened. I want to thank you. Now, if this had been a California Loveland thing, we would have all been working very hard to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. The truth of the matter is, none of that ever happened. This was just people being people, getting the work done, and at the end of it, enjoying each other. I could tell you story after story, but the bottom line would be the same. If you sit in a circle, create a bulletin board, open a marketplace, and go to work around an issue of common concern, where that issue is screeching hot, where it's so complex nobody can figure it out, where it's so diverse in terms of points of view and interests that you couldn't even begin to describe what the intersects were, where there's a whole mess of conflict and passion, and where the decision time was yesterday. Given those conditions and those three things, sit in a circle, create a bulletin board, go to work, works every time. Now, I understand that's total heresy. You can't do that. But we've been doing it thousands of people have been doing that time and time and time again on every continent on the planet, with people ranging from the Native Americans and feds and other bureaucrats to, I had one that we had 250 rabbis and imams from around the world. It's amazing. Okay, I'm not going to try and prove any of that. I'm just simply saying, with those three things, it seemed that conditions were provided to engage in hugely complex and conflicted issues productively, I would say high performingly. So what's the Kool-Aid? You know, what's the Kool-Aid? It's very simple. It's not about doing anything new and different. It's about remembering what we are. Self-organizing. I know that self-organizing is just a cant phrase. And one of my favorite people is a guy by the name of Edward Wilson, who happens to be an entomologist from Harvard. And his big thing is ants. And I got keyed on to Ed Wilson when I was in Africa, and I happened to run across a trail of soldier ants. Some people call them fire ants, but they're soldier ants, going down the middle of a trail. Now, if it's interesting, if you spend any time in the bush in Africa, what you learn very quickly, if the troops are going with the trail, just get off the trail as fast as you can and trail on another day, because they'll get you. On the other hand, if they're going across the trail, what you do is back up, take a running jump, and you'll make it. That's just word to the wise next time you meet soldier ants. Well, I was really curious about these things. I didn't know anything about ants. Well, that's not true, but I didn't know a lot about ants. So I was curious, this is going to sound a little cruel, but I was curious how they sort of kept things together. And I smoked at that point, and I had a cigarette stub of the butt. And so I came up to the column, which fortunately was going across the path, and I dropped the live cigarette butt in the middle of the column. And my prediction was they'd all run all over the place. I was wrong. What happened was there was no bunching. It was very interesting. it stopped. The column stopped right where the cigarette butt had come down. But before it and after it, there was absolutely no bunching at all. It was like somebody had been on a radio forward and aft. We're talking thousands and thousands of ants. And as quick as a wink, the workers were out there picking up grains of sand off of the trail and putting it on the cigarette butt until it was out. And then the column just fell in right over it. That's self-organization. And it's pretty high performing, even for an ant. Anyhow, then I met Ed, read Ed's books, read them sometime. One of his favorite critters are the leaf ant. These things build nests that are probably 9 feet across, 7 feet down, so complex you can't think about it. They cut leaves. That's why they call leaf cutters. Yes. There are millions of ants in these things. And he and his student excavated one of these anthills. They did it, so you can see it. I mean, it's one of the most complex things you've ever seen in your entire life. There wasn't a building committee around. Now, if ants can do this, maybe we can too. Maybe. All right. So that's the world of the ants. And we have this data point, if you will, from open space technology. It does seem to work with human systems, and we know perfectly well it shouldn't. I mean, anybody who's ever been to business school knows exactly what I'm saying. Can't happen. I think it may be worthwhile to sort of back off a hair and put some perspective on this. For each one of us sitting wherever it is we're sitting, the present moment and its extenuation is an existential matter for us. But one of the really interesting things is that we are just a teeny little fragment of solar driftwood that most people would just overlook. I can remember as a high school student, the end of everything was the universe. By the time I got to college, it was the galaxy, with some suggestion that maybe there was something beyond that called the Milky Way. And then it turns out that there's billions and billions and billions and billions of Milky Ways. You don't know the beginning or the end of it. One of my favorite books, it's a humbling book. Read it sometime. It's called The 4% Universe. And it's actually very good science writing about the discovery, if you will, of the size of the universe. It begins with the engineers at Bell Labs discovering that actually that all that stuff on your regular old TV set was really left over from the Big Bang. And I can't take you through the physics even if I wanted to, but the end of the line is, after they figured it all out, where that stuff came from and sort of how it got there, part of the equations that they made was to figure out how much mass and energy you really need in order to have the universe look like it looks without either exploding totally or imploding. As I say, I couldn't do the math for you, but the results were interesting. Turned out But when they put it all together, in order to make everything work, they had to have a whole mess of stuff they called dark energy and dark matter.
Where are you?
And for anybody who cares, dark energy and dark matter is unknown and unknowable. And the percentage of dark energy and dark matter was calculated to be 96%, which meant very simply that 96% of the cosmos was unknown and unknowable, which left us with 4. And we don't know very much about that. The author ends up by saying he takes that 4% as an exquisite calculation of the ignorance and hubris, pride of mankind. It works for me. So I think we have the means, and I think we have, not incidentally, the electronic help to have what we really need to get to, which is sort of where I was heading. A useful conversation for 8 billion people. There was a day that we could sort of assemble a representative crew in San Francisco and create the United Nations. We're well beyond that day. And what a conversation for 8 billion people would look like, I don't know. But I do know that millions and millions of ants manage to engage through the process of self-organization in conversation sufficient to run a massive column over radical obstacles or create architecture that is mind-blowing. That's just for ants. One might think, okay, well, we do open spaces all over the world. Well, I don't think we have the time. And I don't think we have the facilitators, and we certainly don't have the halls. Got to be better than that. And what that is, I don't know. But I'll leave that with you. We do have the means. We can have the will. Making the application is going to be something that won't be a single plan, a single way. It's going to be way out of the box. It's going to take things that, you know, not some nice new process that we're going to go out and train some new facilitators for. We're way beyond that. And the stakes are excruciatingly high, and the time is not all that long. So anyhow, if you're looking for something to do with your life, I suspect that that might just fill the bill. And having spent 84 years around here, I'll cheer you on for as long as I can. I'll try and stay away from Curtis. I love him dearly. But there's the thing about Curtis is he's a cat. And cats do what cats do. We can do what we can do. And I think we will. So anyhow, your other folks is the time. And it's about ready for me to sign off, I think. And have a great day. That's it.